All right, we're ready to continue the fireworks, so if anyone would please take their seats, everyone take their seats, we can begin. I'd like to introduce Jim Carlton from the Wall Street Journal, business publication, but Jim has a wide range of experience covering social protests that have turned, both peaceful and violent. We asked him to give us tips about, when he's been in protests that have been violent. I've known Jim way back when we used to work at the Orange County Register. He's also worked at the LA Times, and now he's affiliated with the Journal. So, Jim, give me the presentation.
I feel like after a cake, you've got some fresh meat here, so. I haven't done any vetting lately, so what do you think of them? I've covered protests since I was a cover reporter 30 years ago in Texas. And obviously many things have changed. There was no social media, there were no cell phones. But the one thing that hasn't changed is I've always believed in going in and trying to get the story. I'm always with the crowd. I'm never really on the side. And a lot of times I'm not liked, and just like Kate's saying, most times the media is distrusted both by the protesters as well as the police. So we're kind of the worst of both worlds. And I try to get over that by just going in and saying, tell me your story, why you're here, etc. And early on, I covered I was like 20 years old. I covered a story, a very raucous strike of oil workers in Texas. And I worked for a non-union paper. And I went up to them and said with the Port Arthur News. And they started calling me scab. And I go, fucking scab. I said, I'm making $150 a week. I want to be in the union. Okay, help me out. So they actually felt sorry for me. And so, I had a problem with that. I started kind of, the Journal, I've covered a lot of it. I covered Silicon Valley, but I started covering the environment in the 90s. And that's kind of how I became an official protest reporter. And a lot of the groups, especially on the West Coast, have been involved in Occupy, Seattle, WTO, started really the environmental movement. And so I knew people at Earth First, the Rainforest Action Network. I used to cover them when they were, doing blockades of logging in the Northwest woods. And so I thought that I wasn't assigned to go to Seattle, so I need to go to Seattle in 1999 for WTO. And that's because everybody in the environmental world was going to be at Seattle. And so I went up, and they formed an alliance with organized labor. And so there's this great alliance with labor, environmentalists, and culturally different people in many cases. And they were in agreement that the globalization movement was just kind of bad for the working person and for the environment. And so there was, the first day of the WTO meetings, there was giant demonstrations. They're very peaceful, thousands. I was struck by how peaceful they were. And I was also struck by the police. The police were in riot gear, and they looked very nervous and just kind of like, I'd see people come up and offer them a flower, and they would, they were ready for trouble. So it wasn't going to take much to set things off. I was just thinking at the time. And sure enough, and this is where I want to talk about something we haven't talked about the last 2 days, which is the role of the Black Bloc and the anarchists. Because I've written a lot about them in the recent years, because they've played a growing role. And that's when I really first saw their role. There were some black, and with their clothes that were black, the bandanas. And they started going through downtown Seattle, breaking out windows. And it happened when one day they started setting trash cans on fire, dumpsters on fire. But it was only a few. It wasn't that many. It was maybe a few dozen. So the police grotesquely overreacted. They sent in trucks of riot cops. They started firing tear gas just indiscriminately. There was one woman who went up to a cop and said, "Shame on you," and shot with a rubber bullet, point blank range. I mean, it was unbelievable. There was a city councilman who was arrested, but he went up and was trying to rein them in. And so it was a really scary situation. And I was on the street, and my job was just to be the street reporter. And I, covering this, I don't really know where to go, because this is before social media, when you could go to Twitter and follow somebody like Susan Cagle, who is one of the greatest, Twitter bloggers at protests I've ever seen. We didn't have that day, so it was, so I followed the crowd. And so I ended up, if you're familiar with Seattle, the Pike Place Market, we were kind of being herded down the Pike Place Market by the cops that went in. And then as we got down there, it kind of dead ends, and there's the market. And I noticed there was traffic stop, there were people trapped in their cars, looking very fearful. And then I saw another group of protesters in the street to my right, and then I saw cops kept moving in. There was like a whole army of cops moving towards me right there. And I didn't have any protection. The tear gas canister, they shot when it landed near me. I started feeling the effects. And I didn't really know what to do. I kind of panicked and I started running. And I rubbed my eyes, which you don't do, I discovered later. And I ended up in a McDonald's parking lot, taking water, and I was phoning my boss, and I just got tear gas, and they'll give me tips, how to deal with that. And since then, I don't have a gas mask, but I mean, this kind of stuff is a little bit handy. Look at this. I may look like an anarchist here, but.
You get a photo of that.
A very flamboyant anarchist.
So anyway, I was at Burning Man a few weeks ago. And I guess it's awesome. Yeah.
Oh, this is perfect. I need to get a photo.
Wall Street Journal, man. I'm screwing the man from within.
Mainstream media.
But I mean, I really should have a real gas mask. Some places are actually on it.
French media wants my.
Oh, great. My boss will be free on that.
Only on social media.
All right, so anyway, the next time you're at a protest, here you go. Kate, do you have to deal with things like this? But, okay, that's my presentation, that's it. Anyway, so, I don't know.